GF had a bit of a gap but larger teeth and a bit of overbite. She was insecure about her smile. The story Berenice is about tooth obsession, not perfect teeth but unique individual teeth.
But a longish time nonetheless. And this long, yet not so long time frame has created ample opportunity for change. And change we have since those very first days on Earth. And actually, there's probably a lot more differences between us and the very first modern humans than one might think. Now, many of these differences are extremely minute and barely recognizable, with some being invisible to the naked eye, while other changes have come but then gone. And what I mean by this is that in some ways we are now more alike to the first people from say 50,000 years ago were. And this is nicely demonstrated by something that has greatly changed through time, but is now reverting to how it once was, our heights. It's a common misconception that humans have always been getting taller, and instead, in reality, height has been a wild roller coaster. And for the better part of the last 100,000 years, we've been
young madam
9:30
on a downward trend. And not to mention that while getting shorter, we've also gotten smaller proportionally. And one of the biggest changes became first noticeable roughly 10,000 years ago, when heights suddenly dropped by about 10%. And researchers believe that this may have been climate and our adoption of agriculture, which in the early days resulted in
Wait, that's like half a foot, no?
something that apparently has not reversed
Hey
yet
Lydia,
in any
what's
visible
it like being 4 feet 11 inches? Just kidding.
I'm so tall.
ways, is our bones, which seem to be considerably weaker than those seen in the earliest sapiens, much closer to what was seen in more stocky homos like the Neanderthals, or even earlier hominins. And this startling drop has likely resulted in a stark limitation to our power output, as our bones cannot take the stress that they used to. Now you might be wondering, why has this happened? Especially
Why
considering
can't
that our
those be
diet
12
is now
inches
pretty good.
long? Because then it would be a foot per run.
And the main suspect behind this development is actually quite clear to researchers, and that is the dramatic difference in human lifestyles of today. The
Can I
first one
evolve
again
to
had
be
to
a
do with the
pro
adoption
gamer?
of farming, which led to less nomadic hunting, meaning people didn't need to be built for taking down absolute units of animals like they did before. And then the second, much more recent hit to our bones came within the last 100 years or so, as truly sedentary lifestyles have become much more common thanks to 9-to-5 jobs and other functions of complex society. And what's
Brew
interesting
doing?
and quite concerning is that the damage seems in some ways to be permanent. And surprisingly, the team didn't even see improvements in groups which were more active. And only time will tell how this trend continues to have an impact. Our bodies have gotten heavier through the worldwide increases seen in BMI,
Drinking your
which
milkies?
unsurprisingly is chalked up to lifestyle changes once again.
My point is never
We
be
have 10
afraid to
hours.
smile. This true for everyone but even more important for you Lydia as your smile lights up the world and warms the hearts of 100Ks.
As in
brain very
2022,
big.
a group had
I is
declared
very
such.
smart people. Duh.
Nah.
But domesticated animal brains are about 10 to 15% smaller than their wild counterparts, possibly due to less threats and them being more tame and social. It was better to be more docile, which compiled then on top of the new lack of threats. You no longer have to worry about trying to survive a predator attack, or how to hunt, forage, bring down an elephant, and so on and so forth.
Lydia, is it a
Across
bad time to tell you
a
I have
building.
left the clan for Angry Birds
And-
and support the #1 plapper? Oopsies joking Lydia's rise up.
Bro can't even spell plapper.
Wow,
Especially since
Lydia,
this time
you're an
around, we also
intellectual
have technology,
powerhouse.
which has led to
How
somewhat
do you do
dependence
it?
on it.
Lol.
See, that's me. That's me. This is actually a fake background, yeah.
And speaking of technology, one thing that's definitely changed is our standards for grooming. Walking around with an ungroomed bush just isn't socially acceptable anymore, above or below the
Grooming.
belt. Now, in contrary to previous things
don't have
mentioned,
a
this
globular
does not seem to be a
brain.
change that is happening right as we speak. And this
She
coincidence
uses her
has led
brain
to
to
the idea
rage
that
bait
globular
chat,
brains
that's
developed
one, and then to
improve the
convince us
function
that
of these
she's
two
Your
always
brain
areas.
looks
right and chat is
supersized now.
always wrong. Well,
And your muscles are so
WWE.
strong they need a new power class.
In continuing the trend, it does seem that our heads really took the brunt of human changes, as another one which has popped up regards not our brains, but our teeth and jaws. But it's only
by the
been in the
way,
last
when is the next episode of Liddy News?
Soon,
Pauses
soon,
hype.
soon. Taking lots
Did you
of drugs.
plan this video or was the segue into teeth a happy accident?
Yeah.
have
I
shrunk
wish my
proportionally.
parents
But
called
then,
me
in
a
addition
happy
to
accident.
this,
People
our vastly
sad.
different diets and lifestyles today are
No,
major players
you
as well,
don't.
with special emphasis being on the diet. Diets had never before been made up of so much soft food, giving animals soft food diets and studies, which have, surprise surprise, found that yes, it did make their jaws shrink, or at least harder than current beds, which might have actually benefited them, as it would have helped keep their mouth closed when sleeping,
love to
which
hang
as a
out with
result
you.
leads to a better
You're
developed
so
jaw.
big.
And one of the biggest
I like to
drawbacks
hang
of
out
these
with you
changes
too.
for us
Great example of your cerebral prowess. Seriously, don't die though, not allowed. You're
I was
hotter
like,
than
I'm really
normal
cold.
Hesmer.
were way more frequent throughout
I
all of
know,
human
crazy
history,
gaslighting
including
from
when we
doctors,
first
I know.
appeared. Scientists think that they, too, were considerably warmer than us. Now, another massive change, which can definitely be seen as beneficial, is regarding our age. Because as a whole, humans have much longer lifespans than our ancestors. However, technology is somewhat a double-edged sword.
40C/104F is really hot. When you hit 42C/108F you can go brain dead.
What?
That explains why you were unresponsive the other day.
That
Maybe
guy.
40 meant that you are too hot. Get well soon. You look fantastic too.
Such as poor eyesight from constant screen use,
My body
do
is
boil
insane,
down
thanks
to recent
for
technological and cultural developments.
I swear he asked when I was gonna go offline yesterday as well.
They are more coherent than most WW, setting the bar high for the rest of us. This guy sus. That's what overheat does to the brain.
Drawn by climate change and droughts, and thus beginning an explosion of phenotypic diversity due to new and varying environmental pressures. Over time, these groups would go on to populate every other continent on Earth, minus one, where in the presence of very different environments, developed adaptations that weren't seen prior. And then to add on to this, the Earth overall has undergone some pretty big changes in just the last 300,000 years, including the last glacial maximum, which again brought pressure upon humans and thus more adaptation. And all of this combined resulted in changes in evolutionary pressure on certain traits. One of the more obvious and well-known ones is pigmentation, as in areas with less sunlight, lighter skin developed to better allow the penetration of UV rays, and thus improve vitamin D synthesis. Meanwhile, some propose that eye color too has been impacted by sun levels, as certain researchers
Time
found
to
that blue
mute,
eyes,
use
for
mouth
example,
tape,
became a
smash
thing
my
as it
skull with a
increases
hammer, then go
intraocular
to
light.
Istanbul for double jaw surgery to become a caveman baddie.
Straight hair popped up in some groups for heating purposes, as it allows for hair on the neck and scalp, which in turn helps keep the area warm and allows cold moisture to be removed more easily. And honestly, just regarding our overall heads, various adaptations in each and every group, which has helped them better to adapt to their environment, resulting in some people having flatter faces, different nose shapes, body builds, and so on. Now, a lot of the traits that I mentioned are seen across massive populations of people, but then we also have those that are very specific.
When I was a kid, there was a girl who told me to put lemon in my eyes so that my eyes would be more blue.
Take the Sama Bajau, for example, a group native to maritime Southeast Asia, who typically live a seaborne lifestyle and have developed traits to aid them in it.
Don't
Namely,
do that.
their spleens are much larger than normal, being about double that of those seen in their neighbors. And while not necessary for survival, because yes, you can actually live without your spleen, spleens do store oxygenated blood, which definitely helps out if you're trying to hold your breath for long periods of time. And coincidentally, many
Wait,
marine
that's
mammals in
sick.
general tend to have enlarged spleens, and the Bajau people on average can hold their breath for up to 5 minutes while diving down, which just for perspective is about
Yeah.
5 to 10 times longer than the average human. A somewhat similar situation, groups that live in high altitude, like Tibetans and Andeans, show
Not
traits
from free
designed
diving, that is just for when you are breathing compressed air, decompression.
I'm diving.
for living up in the mountains
'Cause I
where
know
there is
someone
less
that went from
oxygen,
diving.
resulting in traits allowing them to survive in this environment, including showing adaptations to their hemoglobin, decreased resting heart rates, and increased lung capacity. And what makes this all more fascinating is that most of these features are seen even in people from the group that don't end up actually living in higher altitudes. So in other words, they're built different. However, with all that, phenotypic diversity is also substantial, and genetically arguably greater, among populations that remained in
No,
Africa.
yes, no.
In fact, the continent contains the highest levels of human genetic variation than anywhere else on the planet. And evolutionary pressure here is very much alive and well, just like the rest of the world, and has continued to drive significant adaptations even within the last 10,000 years. One such example is the sickle cell trait, which alters red blood cell shape to offer protection against malaria. And this trait is found at rates of between 10 to 40% in Western Africa, despite it only having evolved some 7,000 years ago or so. Now, with this all said, it is also highly likely that the earliest humans had their own fair share of odd features based on their environment, climate, and genetic pools. And speaking of genes, that's a whole other area we could talk about, as ours are certainly quite
the
different
bends. Yeah,
and
it's
always
called the
changing.
bends.
Off the bat,
Where you go
more genetic
crazy.
diversity exists now than ever before, due to the massive increase in
Hope our
human
answers
population.
was helpful.
While then
peepo
additional
giggles.
factors like Neanderthal DNA
Thanks,
and other
Darren.
extinct human admixture all just go to further increase the diversity of our genomes. And so with all these factors taken into account, you can probably understand why overall, we are surprisingly different than the people who walked the earth 300,000 years ago. And perhaps poetically, it is change itself that is the last thing to talk about, because even how we change is different today than it once was. Never before has an animal been able to use technology to seamlessly spread out across the entire world and basically inhabit any climate it wants to, while simultaneously using technology in pretty much every other part of their lives
He
as
on
well.
the ground.
And honestly, it's basically impossible to tell how our dependency on technology will have a long-term impact on our future, especially when considering that the craziest developments have only started happening not so long ago. But I guess we'll see and cross our fingers for the best. And just for good measure, let's cross them tightly. Thanks for watching, and until next time on Extinct Zoo.